My name is Dirk Hughes, Director of the Michigan Masonic Museum and Library. In this episode of our Masonic Education series, we're going to talk about the anti-Masonic movement that occurred in the United States during the first half of the 19th century. Freemasonry has always had its critics, often from those who misinterpret our methods and principles as being something other than the system of education and moral character-building strategies they are. While others might find our fraternity's devotion to democracy, equality, truth, and justice a subversive threat to the blind obedience they might need to maintain their power. Because of this, it should come to no surprise that dictatorships and other totalitarian regimes often suppress Freemasonry within their citizenry. Italy outlawed Freemasonry in 1925 under the rule of Benito Mussolini. And one of the first things Adolf Hitler did after taking power in Germany was to oversee the dissolution of all German Masonic lodges, confiscating their property under the Enabling Act of 1933. Freemasons living under Nazi rule were held in concentration camps and made to wear the inverted red triangle patch, designating them as political prisoners. But it may surprise some of you that there was even a time in the United States, a country that holds dear so many principles that parallel and agree with those of our fraternity, when some people made a concerted effort to suppress what they perceived to be too much Masonic influence within governmental positions. Freemasonry was very popular in colonial America, and many members of our fraternity were instrumental in the formation of this country. Members of the organization could be found everywhere from the row house to the White House, as common laborers, artisans, businessmen, and politicians. By the 1800s, Freemasonry was still very prevalent throughout American society. Two of its first 6 presidents, including George Washington, were members of the fraternity. And even though it was more likely positions of government were filled by non-Masons, when people became suspicious of their leadership, they often focused on that leader's fraternal connection rather than that leader as an individual. This suspicion was inflamed by what is now known as the Morgan Affair, when in 1826, a man named William Morgan, who claimed to have become a Freemason in Canada, threatened to publish a book exposing Masonic secrets after his attempt to become a member of a Masonic organization in Batavia, New York, was rejected. Even though Morgan's good character had been widely considered questionable for some time, he was eventually arrested for what many people believe were trumped-up charges of theft and unpaid bills. Shortly after he was bailed out of jail, William Morgan was seen in the company of a small group of Batavia Freemasons, before disappearing without a trace. That small group of Freemasons were later identified and eventually pled guilty to the kidnapping of William Morgan, but were adamant about having acted independently and denied any knowledge of what happened to him after they arranged to have Morgan held at Fort Niagara. Many who were already suspicious of the fraternity believed he had been murdered by the group, adding fuel to the fervent anti-Masonic sentiment in that state and surrounding territories. This led to the establishment of the Anti-Masonic Party, a political party with a platform of one issue: to oppose Freemasonry. By 1831, the Anti-Masonic Party was successful enough to have a number of their people elected to local office, ultimately getting their candidates elected as governors in both Vermont and Pennsylvania. And in 1832, the party was responsible for the very first 3-party election in United States history, when they ran their own presidential candidate against the Democratic incumbent Andrew Jackson and his primary opposition, National Republican Henry Clay, both Freemasons. Even though the Anti-Masonic Party won Vermont's 7 electoral votes in that election, Andrew Jackson easily won the presidency for a second term. The Anti-Masonic Party faded into obscurity within a few short years, but the opposition to Masonry that created it lingered throughout parts of the country for some time, causing many Freemasons to immigrate westward for their safety. Here at the Michigan Masonic Museum and Library, you can see particular artifacts from one Mason's flight westward. In fact, we have the actual officer jewels from that lodge in Batavia, New York, used during the time of the Morgan Affair. They were brought to southern Michigan, the frontier of America at the time, by some Batavia brother who hoped they would be protected from possible destruction by the anti-Masons he left behind. And like our noble craft, they survive today despite the efforts of those who try to destroy what they don't understand. The symbol on each officer jewel reminds us, in its own way, to hold true to what we believe is right, to live by the square at all times, and to stand upright, especially when it's most difficult. I'm Dirk Hughes with the Michigan Masonic Museum and Library. Until next time.